failure, abandonment, irrelevance, death. Dr. Jisunny Fisher walks us through it. She is a licensed psychotherapist, a psychospiritualist, and overall is a wonderful practitioner of holistic approach to mental and physical health. We walk through the fine line between passion and suffering and how your perspective is the key to making that difference. The three great fears that all people have: the fear of failure, the fear of abandonment, and the fear of irrelevance, and much, much more. Thank you for tuning in today. Without further ado, Jisunny Fisher. My first big question is, what is psychospiritualism?
Oh, I love that question. I don't know if
What is
anyone's
it?
ever
I've
asked
never
me
really
that.
heard of it. Yeah,
It's
I
not a
mean,
word
it's
that's
right.
in the dictionary yet.
No,
I find
you're a
myself
licensed psychologist and psychospiritualist. What the heck is psychospiritualism?
Well, I find myself at the intersection between psychology and spirituality very often, and I can't say that has been the case for most of my life. But since a few years back, I found that doing a lot of the inner work, which was always required for me anyway to be trained as a psychologist, but really doing the work led me to realize that there was a lot to be uncovered in terms of how I rely on my achievements, on the plaques on the wall, if you will, the certifications, the licenses. I I spent a lot of my life relying on other people to tell me whether I was doing it right, whether it was good enough, or if I have the green light or permission to do what I'm doing. And I realized that I just that's where the intersection is for me. Relying on psychology for me, yes, I love it. I love the study of psychology, what we've come to find about the human experience, the brain, our personalities, and how we interact with one another. But the spirituality piece for me is about giving myself the permission to really do the deep dive of who I am and what makes me tick, not just based on what my textbooks have told me, but based on what I know to be my true experience. So I love the data behind psychology, the things that people before us have shown us about the human psyche, but I also love the area of diving into it myself. So that's where I find myself a lot of the time. It's at the intersection of both.
Yeah, is the psychospiritualism then the the application as it applies to the individual? Then is that accurate description?
It's more about me applying what I know from the field of psychology and what I've come to find in my own journey.
Mm,
So helping others based on not just what I've read and, studied, but based on what my own experiences have been.
I love that. Yeah, I recently have really loved, obviously talking to practitioners. I think as
Mhm.
I've learned more about how we actually measure and track um health and mental health improvements for different methodologies, specifically here in just kind of the modern world. Like, as an
Mhm.
example, like I learned recently that when you see an advertisement, as an example for an SSRI, when they
Mhm.
advertise, oh, a 30% decrease in depressive symptoms, what that's actually saying is it's an average of 30% across the board. But if you have 10,000 participants in this study, there could be half of these people that medicine could have done absolutely nothing. But then
Or
maybe the other half, they saw a
yeah,
60%. And so that's it, we get
right.
caught in this average improvement, average benefits, and we think
Mhm.
it's going to apply to the self. And it not always it it doesn't always apply to you.
No.
Medications don't always work for an individual, and so it's about taking, psychology is so much, and I'm sure in your practical experience, it's like not everything works for everyone. How do you how do you go about helping your clients? How do you go about figuring out what methodologies are going to work for your clients?
Yeah, everyone is different, like you said, and not every strategy that works for the person to your left is going to work for you. So when I do one-on-one work, which I do as a licensed psychologist and a therapist, but also as a hypnotist, I look and see based on what their experience and their history was, what works, what doesn't work, but that actually the things that work for them per se in our sessions really does have to do with just getting to know the person. And I don't think a lot of people actually allow themselves to do that for themselves. So when they come into the space in the container that we're creating and they allow themselves to explore who they really are, where they've been, the things that work for them naturally kind of surface. And
Mm.
sometimes there are strategies that I will give them as takeaways or challenges in between our sessions to allow the magic to continue unfolding that doesn't work because of their lifestyle or their circumstances, their schedule. And sometimes they do. And for the most part, I can tell based on the one to one interaction that we're having whether something will work for you or not because we've done a lot of the digging through what a lot of the muck is.
That seems to require a fairly decent amount of vulnerability and
Yeah.
honesty from an individual to even dive into those areas.
Mhm.
Um, it's quite obvious, at least to me, why some people prefer to go through life haphazardly and kind of blind, so to speak,
Mhm.
because to open your eyes to, maybe the gunk that you have within yourself is
Yeah.
scary.
Mhm.
It can be
Absolutely.
terrifying to look into your own abyss and to see what stares back. To use that
Absolutely.
quote, how do you how do you get people to a state of, I don't know if confidence is the right word, but how do you get people to feel comfortable enough? How do you get people to feel confident enough that they can, handle the demons that they have inside? How do you help people even get to that point? Because that, I'm sure, it takes
Mhm.
a lot of work to even get to that point before you can really start making change, like getting people
Yeah.
to be aware of their stuff. How do you help people get to that point?
So it this reminds me indirectly of something that I think will help answer the question. If not, we can go approach the question directly. But
Please.
within the human psyche, we have this innate desire or need for struggle. And if you are not
Oh,
careful about understanding this very fact that we have an inherent, like we're wired to need to struggle. It's a rite of passage for us on this human journey. And if we need to struggle, why not choose how or where we're going to struggle anyway? It's the difference between what some people call passion and what some people call suffering. So a lot of people spend most of their lives suffering, whereas the people that have it together, if you will spend a lot of their time feeling passionate. And I've come to see, and I really do believe the only or the major reason why people have this delineation, whether you're suffering or you're feeling passionate about your life, is because you know that you need to struggle and you're choosing how you're going to struggle anyway. So I remember there was this one particular time when I was building one of my businesses, and I was up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning doing some work. I'll call it work for now. My husband got up and he came out. He was bewildered. And he was like, "What are you doing still awake? Why are you working so hard?" And he implied that there was this suffering element to it. But for me, that struggle wasn't suffering. It was something that I felt extremely passionate about. And I was up at 3 in the morning, not even realizing how much time was really going by. And I think there's a really big distinction between suffering and passion that people don't realize based on the fact that this human journey has specific elements that are um, repeated in everyone's lives. So, we all have this need to struggle. It's a rite of passage. Whether you choose to harness it and choose how you're going to experience that struggle is completely up to you. B, every human being has three fundamental fears. And these fears are what actually fuel the things that, like you were mentioning, that really fuel whether or not we're afraid to look into the abyss, whether or not we're courageous enough to face the things that we're ashamed about. But the shame that we're talking about is so intricately connected to the three fundamental fears that we have as part of this human experience. And we're all going to have those fears, but they just might show up differently. But if we know what they are, then at least we're taking the right steps towards being able to integrate the things that we're afraid of, to integrate the things that we're ashamed about.
I look at a lot of things through the lens of evolutionary psychology. It's by far one of the most fascinating topics, at least to me. And I totally agree that we do have this like need to struggle. Like we have this need
Mhm.
to, I don't know, fight for something in some way, shape, or form. Uh, have you thought much about why that might have benefited us from, a survival standpoint over the last, hundreds of thousands, millions of years? Like why do we have that need? How was it advantageous to us? Have you
Mm.
thought much about that?
Yeah, so I love evolutionary psychology too. And it's really a lot of it is based on theory, but it just makes a lot of logical
Yeah.
sense. And evolutionary psychology teaches us that the human brain is actually broken down into three different brains. We have the reptilian brain, and then over that reptilian brain, we have the mammalian brain that wraps over it, and then we have the human brain. And evolutionarily speaking, the reptilian brain came first, and then we evolved to have the mammalian part of the brain, and then we have the human part of the brain, the cortex. But the thing is, each of those different parts of the brain are responsible for different things. So the reptilian brain is responsible for keeping you alive, making sure you're here in one piece. The mammalian brain that evolved afterwards is the part of your brain that makes sure that you are well connected, that you have experiences with nourishing relationships. And then the human part of the brain is a part of the brain that thinks of the dinner that you have planned and how you're going to dress for it, and like what you're going to do tomorrow and your meeting with your boss. So you have these three different parts of the brain, but they're responsible for very different things. The question that we're asking is the need for struggle. How does that help us evolutionarily speaking? I don't think it does. I think the need to struggle is wired within the part of our brain that I don't want to call it the human part of the brain that creates logic and makes us think through our days, that plans through our events and our life, but it's the part of the human brain that really connects to understanding the meaning of life, why we're here. And I think that part of us that is connected to why are we here, connecting to that bigger thing, something greater than us, is the part of the brain that helps us to navigate what we just talked about needing to suffer, not suffer, struggle. Struggle is the word, needing to struggle. So
Yeah.
it's not
It,
about surviving, it's about thriving, right? So we have these two
yeah.
modes. Am I in survival or am I in the mode of being able to thrive? And I think that question of why do human beings need to struggle? Why is that an inherent part of the human journey? I think is all about once you've mastered that part of like, am I safe? I'm surviving, yes. Then we have to think about like, am I thriving? Am I happy? Am I passionate? Do I have joy in my life? Am I actualizing to my full potential?
Yeah. I totally agree that we need, uh, do you know who Alex Hormozy is? Big internet guy
Mm-mm.
right now. Entrepreneurship. He's got some decent content, but he had tweeted something once. I believe the rough quote is, "You have already accomplished things you said would make you happy," and
Mm,
that's a killer. As we
yeah.
achieve one goal, we're always setting the next. We're always moving the goalposts. I totally agree that we have to have something that we're like really struggling for. That
Mhm.
the work. Uh, I totally agree is a need. But it sounds like from your perspective, the biggest difference between suffering through something and having passion, kind of tapping
Mhm.
into um some of that passion is your perspective on that suffering, where one camp of people think that suffering is optional, and the other camp of
Mhm.
people know that you're going to suffer either way, so you might as well suffer in the
It goes
ways that you
beyond
want.
that. It
Okay.
goes beyond that. So, for example, if I'm working with a client and she's really suffering because she can't accept her weight and she hates the way she looks and she neglects every other part of life because she becomes obsessive about this, like, I need to lose 50 pounds, for example. The thing is, she has all of this energy, for lack of a better word that I will use, and she is focused on, I am overweight and I can't love myself and accept myself the way that I am. I feel a lot of shame with the extra weight I'm carrying, so I am suffering. I hate myself. What we are looking to do is we're looking to channel that energy to focusing on something that she's actually passionate about. Maybe so far she's been able or she hasn't been able to lose the weight because she is trying to look good. For example, right? Like, I just want to look good in my clothes. I want to be respected by the people around me. And if I am this overweight, I can't look good or I can't be respected. If we then channel that energy instead for her to focus on something like, you know what, I want to be healthy. I want to be alive for my two daughters that are here and they're going to be getting married in 15, 20 years. I want to be here and alive for them. Or I want to have enough energy so that I can walk up a flight of steps to my office and not feel so winded and feel really good about starting my day. If we can channel the energy that she's using to be stuck and to being in that state of suffering and channel that energy instead to something that she can feel passionate about, then the weight naturally falls off. It's just something that happens naturally. I can't, like, it's a, do you,
Well, you
have you ever
start
heard this thing?
acting.
Yeah.
Well, I think you start acting in accordance with that identity. You
Yes.
know, you know,
Exactly.
in this specific example, right? No, I'm someone that's going to be around for my children's wedding.
Mhm.
You know, I'm gonna be the fun grandparent. I'm still gonna be able to throw my grandkids up in the air when I'm, 50, 60 years old, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you can make that a part of your identity, all of a sudden, yeah, of course, like a person that's gonna go, throw their grandkids in the air when they're 60 years old, of course, is someone that's gonna eat healthy today, is gonna be a
Yes.
little bit more mindful of their intake, is gonna exercise and stretch and do yoga and lift weights and run and do all those things, just because it's like, yeah, I'm gonna be a fun grandpa,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you'll, whatever that is.
Yeah. That's a
What
really
do
great way to put it, Andrew.
hypnotism always,
Mhm.
those damn on stage, charlatans, what do people get wrong about hypnotism, and what would
Charlatan.
you like to announce to the world, right? This isn't the get up on stage and wave a watch, it's
Yeah.
that's not real hypnotism. I'm aware of that. But what do tell me about the misconceptions. What actually is hypnotism?
Yeah. So hypnotism is something that is directed on purpose, but it actually comes from a, let me start over. So hypnotism is something that you already do naturally, but you're just directing it on purpose. So when you are in a trance, for example, because you are driving from home to your office or from your office back to home, and you've done this drive so many times that you could probably practically do it with your eyes closed. I wouldn't advise that, but it's just something that you already know how to do pretty naturally. So you're not thinking when you're on that drive and you're really caught up in your thoughts.
Mm,
And then you get home from work and you're like, oh my God, how did I get here? Like, I don't remember the last 20 minutes of my drive. You are in a state of trance when you're doing that. Or you're in a trance when you're watching your favorite movie and everything else kind of just blurs around you, right? And that one thing that you're focused on is the movie. You're part of it. That's another state
mm,
of trance. So, what hypnotism is we're taking that state of trance, that state that you're already doing naturally all the time anyway, and we're just directing it on purpose so that we can access the parts of your brain that are creating identity attributes to who
mm,
you think you are in this world. So, a lot of the work that I do If I were to not use hypnosis and I just use, for example, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, it would take years to undo some of these limiting beliefs that a lot of people have. But if we can approach it from being able to use that state of trance you're already doing all the time anyway, and access the part of your brain, your subconscious, that's creating these quote unquote facts about who you are and your identity, and we can rewire that, then that happens almost immediately. That shift is something that happens naturally. So the hypnosis, Andrew, that you refer to, stage hypnotists, yes, what they're doing is for entertainment. And I'm not saying that that hypnosis is not real, because it is, but it's entertainment purposes. The part of doing hypnotic work with a psychotherapist, for example, is very much based on the foundation that I can't control you. I can't make you do anything that you wouldn't already do naturally anyway. I'm just creating a space for you to enter into state of trance with a specific goal that we've set in mind. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. To ask maybe about the specific, examples you gave, I feel like for sure I can absolutely, see myself like there was a point in time where my commute to work and from work was about 35 to 40 minutes. It was quite a bit.
Mm.
But I can totally relate. I feel like I could, be like, oh my gosh, I'm home. What is going on? As long as I was kind of in silence,
Mhm.
if I was like, figuring out what song to listen to or listening to a podcast, I don't feel like I get into that trance. But then
Mhm.
it's funny because yeah, you're totally right. You can be, in a movie.
Mhm.
And I think maybe the question that comes to mind is those are both situations that one I relate with a lot. But I feel like it's easy to get into a trance in those situations. You've got the visuals of the road, you're driving, your mind is at least occupied on this, relatively simple task. When you're watching a movie, you're enveloped in the movie. You're not like as distracted.
Mhm.
Whereas what I imagine is the setting in a session with a licensed psychologist and performing some hypnotic trances is that becomes much more akin to something like meditation, I imagine.
Mm.
And meditation, I think probably for a lot of people is tough because you do expect to sit down and feel calm, when in reality, I think most people sit down and all the thoughts and processes that you've distracted yourself from throughout the entire day almost come rushing back, and they're like, okay, you're giving us some space, we got to process now. So how do you help someone get into a calm enough, this is all a preamble to my question of how do you help people um uh uh, how do you teach people to actually get into that state of trance?
Yeah. So it's all about where your focus is. If you're not trained or practiced in directing where your focus goes, trance is going to, or
Mm,
directed trance, hypnosis, is going to be somewhat difficult. But it takes some practice for some people. And for other
yeah.
people, it's the guidance, that all that they require is the guidance, and they go into trance right away. And in fact, when you say you want your mind to be still, the quickest way to do that is to do it through your body. This is why a lot of
Mm,
meditations, like you brought up, Andrew, it goes through relaxing different muscle groups of your body so your body is relaxed. Because if your body is relaxed, your mind is relaxed. And it goes both ways, vice versa. If your mind is relaxed, your body has to relax. This is what they're talking about when they say there's a mind to body connection, and people don't understand how important or how powerful this is. When I can help you to relax your body, your mind will relax. And if I can relax your mind or help you to relax your mind, then I can help your body to relax. But it's all about where we direct your focus. And hypnosis really is just a hyper relaxation and a hyper focus. That's all.
do you do you advise clients go in with a mantra? Do you suggest clients
Mm.
come in with some type of repeating mantra that they can say to themselves, under their breath but in hushed tones, and how it can take a lot of self work to even know what the problem is. Can you use hypnosis to not only implant thoughts and implant, limiting beliefs, but can you also use hypnosis to diagnose and help a client to actually like figure out like, oh, I thought I wanted this, but it's actually because of this thing from my childhood. Does hypnosis go in both directions, or is it just kind of an intake kind of deal?
No. So it actually goes both directions. You're absolutely right. I wouldn't
Okay.
use hypnosis to diagnose someone per se, but we could use
Yeah.
it to help them gain clarity. So it's not about going
Hmm.
in, like setting an instruction or creating a download, but being able to help you find the clarity to any specific question that you might have. Absolutely.
I'm thinking for a second.
Yeah, that's all right.
Kind of back to this point on struggling
Mm-hmm.
from what you've experienced in your own relationships and what you've experienced from the relationships of your clients. How do you see this, kind of you're gonna struggle either way play out in relationships? And I do ask that question because I think I'm not sure how new of an idea it is. I'm sure there's been some permeation of this throughout history, but that relationships should have a sense of ease. And if there is
Mm.
any dis-ease of any kind, oh, then hey,
Mm-hmm.
not the right relationship for you, buddy, oh pal, you should get out of there. So I think this. Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective and your personal experience about again,
Yeah.
how do
Mm-hmm.
you have a correct perspective on this? You're gonna suffer either way. How does it play on relationships?
Yeah. Love this question. So whenever I'm working with a client, it's always for a relationship issue, whether it's a relationship with others,
Always.
mhm,
Yes,
whether
love it.
it's a relationship with others or a relationship with yourself. And you have to get your relationship with yourself right if you want any of your other relationships to work out. The thing that I know, which is I think a shift that is probably already starting to happen anyway, is that our relationships, our outside relationships with other people, are always there to either help us to feel loved, teach us a lesson, or bring out the best in ourselves. And I truly do believe the relationships that belong in your life are going to be the ones that enrich your life, whether it's because they enrich your life in ways that make you feel like you belong here, or because they enrich your life through specific things they're teaching you to look at about yourself. So if you find that in relationship after relationship after relationship, the problems you're having have to do with like the same pattern, it's a repeating pattern, then you know it's not the outside relationships that's a problem, but it's the relationship with yourself. So when I have clients come to see me because they're not sure if they want to stay, and we're talking about romantic relationships now, but they're not sure if that person that they're with is the right person, if they want to leave, should they stay? There's so many things that get in the way. The biggest question we're asking is, do they continue to enrich their lives? If they do not, then perhaps it's time to close that chapter in your life. And I know that's easier said than done, especially with people who have kids, for example, or who are really entangled in different contracts, like having a house together and, they've built a life together for 45 years. That becomes more difficult when that history is there and that specific level of commitment needs to be there when they have kids. But it really truly comes down to, do they enrich your life in some way? If they no longer do, then it's time to close that chapter, because as long as they're in your life, you're not creating or leaving enough space for someone new to come in.
And there's definitely, this kind of goes back to, I think it was, I'm not sure who the original. Are you familiar with Churchillian drift? Are you
No.
familiar with that
You're
idea?
introducing me to so many people and topics I don't know.
Churchillian drift refers to Churchill, right? The British
Okay.
Prime Minister during World War II.
Mhm.
It's kind of this idea that, popular sayings or quotes will over time often be attributed to Churchill. Just that over time, it's like, oh, I think Churchill said that. And so, I think quite often of that, but the expression, choose your hard, kind of comes to mind, right? It's hard to
Yeah.
go. It's hard to have date night every single week. And it's also hard to feel disconnected. It's hard to
Mhm.
swallow your pride and, admit you're wrong, but it's also hard to, be in a relationship where your partner is closed off because you're not willing to admit that you're wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I choose your hard. Churchill said it. You focus a lot on the first line in your bio, which I love. I'm a mental fitness soul aligning enthusiast, and you
Mhm.
talked earlier about how the body, really the body is the only way to calm the mind, and there is, I love to see, especially some of the newest literature coming out that really does go to show that the mind is not isolated. The body is absolutely part of the system. What are, as you work with clients and in your own experience, what are the big things that people are missing in their body that's contributing to their mental wellness being,
Mhm.
less than optimal, right? What are the, not necessarily the quick fixes, but what do people generally not have in their lives when it comes to their body to help make sure that their mental fitness is also up to date?
Two things come to mind. I think one is because it's more recent that I was talking to someone about this, and the other I just truly believe. Sleep is one of them. People just aren't getting enough quality sleep. And research is showing that it's not really about the duration of sleep, but your consistency with sleep. So if you're waking up at 6 in the morning on the weekdays, don't wake up at 10 o'clock on the weekends. That's something that has been shown recently in the research. And then the other piece that I'm thinking about is flexibility. When you think about someone that is aging, and actually research has shown this, people associate aging with being really slow, right? Like older people move really slow, and the slower you move, the older you are. But the
Yes.
reason why I believe our bodies
Yep.
move slow isn't because of aging, it's because of all the trauma that they've been carrying in their body that's actually quote unquote slowing them down. And that happens because there is a level of inflexibility that begins to really like harden within our body. So I think focusing on flexibility in the body is so important when it comes to the mind body connection, because if your body is flexible, your mind will be flexible. And in fact, like in doing one of my most
It,
favorite stretch exercises, it's about 20 minutes. There was a time months ago where like I had the most amazing breakthrough and I wasn't even consciously aware of it. I just know that I was stretching and all of a sudden I'm bawling my eyes out. So I really truly do believe flexibility is so important when it comes to that mind body connection.
I can, Jisunny just sitting there crying as she's doing her yoga routine. I've certainly had those experiences. Um, a lot of times late at night at the gym, if I can't sleep, I'm like, I'm just gonna go work out real quick.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times it's because there's something going on underneath the hood,
Mm.
and just that exercise, just being kind of, body distracted, mind free kind of deal.
Hmm.
I personally believe that um, one of the biggest challenges in our society is that we can distract ourselves from so much. I'm not sure if you frequent Reddit at all, but there's an entire subreddit called Shower Thoughts, and
Okay.
it's just an entire Reddit feed about cool, interesting, weird thoughts that people have in the shower. Like this is like a
Mhm.
cultural thing, and I heard it explained once, and I totally agree. It's because you can't like really bring your phone into the shower. You like yes your phone is waterproof, but as soon as there's water on the screen, like nothing registers. It's useless in the shower. And
Mm.
so that's the only time, those 10-15 minutes are like the only time that people generally have to just be,
Mm.
and in you may be your hands are a little distracted, right? You're scrubbing, you're cleaning, so it's like you're kind of physically doing something, but you don't have any distractions in front of you. So I personally feel that one of the greatest disservices we do to ourselves is by, hey, I had a stressful day, let's turn on the TV instead
Mhm.
of let's sit with this thing for 15-20 minutes and then I'll turn on a show.
Yeah.
Let me work through it and approach TV with or any activity as a, hey, I've already worked through it. I don't need this thing to distract me from it. I've worked through my anxiety on the day. Now I can relax. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like people just distract themselves.
Yeah. The thing about the shower though is when you think
How
about it, Andrew, you have nothing to do. You can't distract yourself with the phone. You can't
exactly?
watch a movie.
Yep.
But the reason why you have like that the stroke of genius that happens most likely in the shower is because of running water. Scientists can measure in
Mm,
running water, there's a lot of it's called negative ions, which is such a misnomer, but our bodies are missing negative ions, which happen to be the case when you're by a beach, for example, right? Moving water. When you're by the waterfall, moving water. When you're by a beautiful
interesting.
river or creek. Exactly. Um, there's something about our bodies not having enough negative ions that I think being by moving water really helps to reset. And when you think about it, very rarely are our bodies physically connected to the planet. And we're giant batteries walking the planet, and we're never plugging in to recharge. So going out and, being barefoot on grass, being barefoot on dirt or sand is so extremely important. And I think it's because we're missing negative ions. We're not charging our bodies enough.
And what does running water have to do with negative ions? I'm totally
Yeah.
clueless on the
So
subject.
when we're by running water produces negative ions in the air. So our bodies are able
Okay.
to absorb the negative ions that we need because we're so positively charged, which I know it sounds like a good thing, but it's actually really not. It's a lot of where inflammation starts, for example, that being in that environment, that space, taking in the negative ions helps our bodies to reset.
Interesting. I know absolutely nothing about this topic, but um that's really fascinating. Well, Jisunny, I appreciate your time today. I want you to plug your book, The Blueprint.
The
Give
Bodhi
people
blueprint.
like a quick teaser.
Yeah.
What did I say?
The
Bodhi.
body.
I
We were talking
mispronounced
about
it.
the body. It's
The
okay.
body. The Bodhi Blueprint.
Yeah,
No, please fill us in. Give us a plug. Where can people find more about
absolutely.
you
Thank
and
you.
and get more of your content?
Yeah, so the Bodhi Blueprint, Andrew, is a book about walking us through the three human fears. And I know we didn't really talk about that, but the three human fears are the fear of failure, the fear of abandonment, and the fear of irrelevance. So whenever in our lives we get stuck, or we feel we're confused, or we're lost, or we're suffering, it's because we're struggling with one of those fears: failure, abandonment, irrelevance. I don't know why I can never say that word, irrelevance. But the book walks us through what each of those fears are, how do they show up in our lives, and then helps us to give something to aim for. So whenever we think about someone who is successful, someone who's got it together, someone who is just like on that mountain peak, they've already climbed the mountain, they're at the summit, someone who seems like they've got it together, it's because they've somehow integrated the human needs that correlate to the three human fears. And whenever I've reached or connect with someone that have their shit together, I'm sorry if you're going to have to edit that out, but whenever
No,
someone has their
no,
stuff
there's swearing
together,
here. There's swearing here. You're good.
okay, good. It's because they've integrated, they've mastered these three fears. So when you think about someone, anyone who's successful, so think about that person now. Do you have someone in mind?
This is one I struggled with
Okay.
because, so I struggle with this, and actually, I should ask when I schedule these, I usually say it's going to take about 45 minutes. Do you have a little bit more time?
I have
Because
a
I'd
couple
still love
minutes,
to
yeah.
dive into those. Okay, nice.
Sure.
Okay, let's go for another 10 if that's okay. Yeah, so this is a tough one for me. It's something I've worked on a lot because I think generally I've always looked at other people as being successful. But then when you actually learn about that person, it's like, oh, you're just really successful in this one area that I envy because I don't have that kind of success in my life. But I actually still wouldn't trade positions because you have a shit relationship with your wife, and I actually don't care about your, economic success because your family hates you. So
Yeah.
I'm fine not trading. So I think this is something I've worked on quite a bit, is when I do see someone and I feel like a little bit of, jealousy isn't the right word, but I'm like, man, I wish I had that. I have learned to check myself to say, I don't know everything about that person.
Yeah.
This one aspect looks really appealing, but their kids may hate them. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade anything in the world for a bad relationship with my kids. Like, it's just not,
Right.
it's not a worthwhile. So I do struggle. I don't know anyone that's
Got all of
truly
their ducks in a
successful
row.
because I don't know if they have all their ducks in a row. Like,
Yeah.
bro, even like my best friends, who, in certain areas, I'm like, man, I wish I had that. Like, even my best friends, I'm like, but I don't know the inner texture of their mind. I don't know what the landscape of their mind looks like. So how can I say that I would really trade my place with theirs?
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. So
Um,
you know how we talked about like we all need to struggle. It depends on where we
yeah.
choose or not
Yeah.
choose
Yeah.
to struggle.
Yeah.
I think everyone will have an area of struggle. And I think this is something I knew intuitively when I was a
Mm,
child because I grew up in a Christian
yeah.
home and I'd watch these
Cool.
pastors speak on these pews and go like, who was he to tell me, like who was he to
Yeah.
make me feel
Yeah.
like, less than or
I had
like
a
a
similar
sinner.
experience. Yeah.
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 And I
I
knew
feel
this
that.
intuitively. So I don't think anyone is perfect. We're all flawed. But for the most part, like when I think about someone who's successful, and for example, for me, Tony Robbins comes to mind, right? I know I don't know him as a person. I
Sure.
don't know every aspect of his life. But what I do know is the parts that have been highlighted for me, the character that must have developed as a response to how he chose to navigate life and how he chose to navigate through his struggles, it really inspires me. And a lot of people who have most of their ducks in a row show up with a level of peace that not the average man has, shows up with a level of authenticity that the average man doesn't have, and has a certain sense of flow in their life that happens because it's just a byproduct of doing their inner work. So when we know how to master the fear of failure, the fear of abandonment, and the fear of irrelevance, these three things, peace, authenticity, and flow, show up in our lives as a result. So there is a saying, and I love the saying, and I don't know where I got it. I might have picked it up out of the blue and the ethers, but it's always an inside job. And I truly do believe that.
Churchill said it.
Yes,
It was Churchill.
said it. And if everything is an inside job, the things that I am seeing in my life that I don't like, it's because there's something inside of me that needs to come back into balance. And this is where the
Yeah.
three fears and mastering the three fears actually really come into play.
What does can you define you can you define irrelevance
Mm-hmm.
and why are we scared of being irrelevant?
The fear of see, I can never say it
Yeah,
right the first time.
yeah, no, no,
Irrelevant.
no, no. And I
The
yes,
fear
the
of
L before V. Yes.
so the fear of irrelevance is this fear of not existing. So this I think a lot of where we have this fear of dying comes from, like, oh my god, what happens when I die? Like, do I stop existing? Do I matter anymore? And this ties
Yeah.
into, like, do I matter? What is my legacy? Did I do things that helped the world, helped my family, my community? The fear of irrelevance is the fear that what you did wasn't enough. Not in the sense like, am I good enough? But in the sense that, like, if I stop existing, did I matter?
Um why would we care about that? I mean, we're all going to die.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to be forgotten.
Yeah.
I know my grandfathers, but I don't even know if I know the names of my great grandfathers. You
Mm.
know, it,
Yeah.
I think we all know we'll be for, maybe not. Maybe we don't all know that. It's something I think about to
Mm-hmm.
help me actually overcome my fear of failure is that um, I
Yeah.
will forget my failure and everyone around me will forget it because like we're all going to be gone. Um, but yeah, why do we, is this a evolutionary psychology remnant of passing my seed along and my DNA wanting to repopulate and that's why I want legacy and
Yeah.
status. So why do we have this? Why do you think we have
Yeah.
this fear of irrelevance?
So I love that you brought that up. Remember how we talked about the brain, the human brain
Yeah,
specifically has three separate brains. The reptilian
sure.
brain is the most ancient. This is the part of the brain that's going
Yeah,
to control the fear of failure or try to help harness the fear of failure, right? It's about,
yeah,
am I going to survive? The fear of abandonment comes from the mammalian brain. It's the part of your brain that evolved next. It's, do I belong? So it's not about, can I specifically survive, but can my species survive? It's that belonging. It's the part of your brain that is in control of your emotions, that regulates your emotions. And the fear of irrelevance then is from the part of your brain called the neocortex. It's the human part of the brain that I like to think of as ego. It's everything that you think you know about yourself as your personality, your life experiences. It's all in that brain of the neocortex. And this is where the fear of irrelevance comes up. The fear of irrelevance, essentially what it is you not being able to reconcile two specific human needs. We all have the human need to be selfish, but we also have the human need to be selfless. Those two needs are very much in conflict with each other. They're almost the polar opposites of one another. And when the fear of irrelevance actually dictates your life, causing suffering, what happens is we see that those two human conflicts haven't reconciled with one another. And a lot of the ways, for example, that fear of irrelevance might show up in your life is maybe you have a lack of clarity about who you are, what your purpose is, or maybe you have a lack of motivation, right? So not being able to manifest the vision that you have in your mind, or you have an idea, but you can't follow through on it. That's a lack of motivation issue. So the fear of irrelevance might show up in
and
those
that's
two
related
ways.
to ego,
Yes,
and
your
that's
ego.
related to ego. You're saying why is
Yes.
that? Why is motivation tied to ego?
Because it has everything to do with, does my ego matter? So it's the fear of like
Mm,
disappearing, if you will. And so
mm,
if you have that fear of disappearing, getting in your way of being able to self actualize, which is a big part of why we're all here, what happens
yeah,
is that you are going to continue to get stuck and you're not going to be able to harness the energy um,
yeah.
of motivation.
Mm.
I talk
The
about it in my
the way
book.
that I've
Hmm.
oh well then people need to
You
read the
should get
book.
it.
Obviously.
Of course.
Duh. Bodhi Blueprint, right? Did I say that one right?
Yes,
Yes?
exactly. The Bodhi Blueprint.
Yes. Heck yeah. Um, something I've been thinking about lately, and I think this relates. I've actually discovered that that over I think the last few years especially, I've almost lost my sense of play. I've kind of lost my sense of just being able to have fun with things. Everything's so damn serious when you're an adult, right? You know,
That's
you
the
get
fear of failure coming up.
work. Yes, right. And
Mhm.
you know, that's definitely part of it. But something I've been thinking about, you know, especially with my kids, like I see them and it's like, you know, their natural state is play and exploration and trial and work and figuring things out. And so I've kind of thought about this as it applies to like motivation. And I'm kind of workshopping this you know thought that motivation is actually our natural state. Movement, doing is our natural state. I think partially because, you know, if you're a hunter gatherer, if you're not out gathering and you're not out working, like you die. If you don't put in the work, you die. And so I've been thinking about, well, if my natural state is motivated, then there's a reason I'm unmotivated. And so I've kind of stopped using the term like, oh, I feel motivated or I don't feel motivated. I am unmotivated. And so why? And it's like,
Yeah.
as I've like really, you know, and I'm getting better at it. I'm still not very good, but when I do have some time free, I'm like, oh, like I could work on my podcast. I could, you know, book, you know, reach out to some guests, chop up episodes. And I feel, you know, if I don't feel like doing it. It's like, well, there's actually, I'm getting better at it. I'm not always good at diagnosing, but generally when I can figure out, well, why don't I feel motivated right now to do this? Why am I unmotivated? It's usually because it's usually some version of like, why would like, it comes down to like doubt that the podcast ever takes off. It's like, man, if I'm going to put all this time and energy into this thing and it never even takes off, I've sacrificed that time when I could have used it to do something more relaxing. So a lot of it comes back to fear of failure, right? And so that's what that made me think of is, you know, our natural state is movement, motivation, doing, figuring, problem solving, and it's our mental bullshit that gets in the way that makes us feel unmotivated.
Well, you know,
What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, so I think the human state of needing to just be is also a natural state. And that those two
Mm,
states are always in conflict with one another. I need to be, I just be, or I
yeah,
need to do, right? And go out and achieve. It's that polar opposite if you want to think of the yin and the yang. It's the masculine
yeah,
and the feminine energy, yang being the
sure.
masculine. And when
Mm,
you're saying you've been feeling like you're losing a sense of play and you're not motivated because you're afraid, like, what's the point if this doesn't succeed or if it fails? That
sure.
fear, yeah, is huge.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to see it as a difficulty of reconciling the human need to be in control, but also the
Mm,
human need to be cared for. So I need to do is I need to be in control. And I'm just going to be, I'm going to play is the human need to just be cared for. So those two human needs are in conflict with one another. And if we don't reconcile the two, it shows up as, for example, having money issues or having health issues or not, or losing that sense of play, like you said. And that all comes like
yeah,
with that beautiful gift of being or having a fear of failure.
sure. And then it kind of leads us back to, you know, I can either struggle to work through all this mental gunk or I can
Mhm.
continue to struggle as someone that whose life is not as filled with play
Yeah,
as much as it
exactly.
should, you know, for
Exactly.
sure. But
Yeah.
Jisunny, you're amazing. Bodhi Blueprint, everyone go Bodhi Fully podcast. Go connect with Dr. J. Everyone listening, Jisunny. Thank you. This has been fun. I've enjoyed our
Thanks for having
conversation.
me. Thank you.